frightening or terrible event, such as an accident or an assault, or something where they feel their life is threatened or in danger, or they're facing death. Okay. Quite often there's a physical injury that we understand quite well. You know, we'll see signs of bruising, broken bones, that sort of a thing. Trauma or psychological trauma is the emotional injuries that individuals experience as in the form of a wide range of very intense emotions, either immediately after or for a long time subsequent to the event. And they can be quite paralyzing and can be, depending on how intense they are and how drawn out they can be, they can have really difficult consequences on your ability to function. I think it's important to note, however, that not typically people recover from traumatic events, you know, over time. But for some of us, the injury is so severe that it sort of keeps them stuck and impairs their functioning because of their inability to process and to handle these emotional ups and downs that come because they have experienced one or more distressing events. So in summary, it's really the emotional, I guess you have to call it like a cocktail of the cocktail of emotional experiences that people have that come subsequent to one or more distressing events.
So is there a scale in terms of your definition of trauma, or is everything considered traumatic if you have an unpleasant experience?
Well, trauma can be used in different ways. So for instance, in medical circles, you might have a blunt trauma to the head, and that describes the action that that caused the injury. Okay. What we are talking about is psychological trauma rather than the traumatic event. And psychological trauma can be mild to severe. It can also develop into certain mental health disorders as well, depending on how severe it is. So yes, there is a scale, and it would be considered mild to severe. Trauma can also be considered acute, where one event has happened and this person is suffering the ill effects of their emotional, psychological trauma. Or it can be chronic over long because the person has been exposed to this distressing event, sort of like domestic abuse or that sort of a thing. Sometimes even neglect, like in the case of children, long-standing neglect can cause psychological trauma. But it's when you're exposed to distressing events where you feel helpless, you can't help yourself, you feel trapped, you can't do anything to save yourself from the situation over a long period of time, and then you experience what we call chronic trauma. Complex trauma also is where you're exposed to a series of different multiple traumatic events, okay? Which, guess what? So for instance, like the fact of what we're living through right now, COVID. I mean, COVID brings with it so many different forms of distressing events, the isolation, the dealing with death and existential questions, the break in our routine, the break in our sense of stability and structure. All of those are different traumas that people can react differently to.
Okay, thank you very much for that very detailed explanation. I will now hand over to Dr. Annette Walker for her to continue with the questions.
All right, Dr. Hardware, I think I will start.
Okay, well, go ahead, Principal Cole.
Right, so thank you so much. You are doing an awesome job thus far. Thank you so much, panelists, for joining. We're delighted to have you. Let me just give a shout out to my staff at St. Anne's Bay Primary and all the persons, all teachers from St. Anne, Jamaica, those persons who are watching. Thank you so much for joining today. My question, I'm going to start with Pastor Bailey, because there are some issues or concerns that we would want to discuss. Pastor Bailey, given your background as a pastor, psychologist, you also work with the Ministry of Justice. You would have had first-hand experience dealing with victims of trauma, but we are quite aware of the different categories, that there are different categories to trauma. So we would want you to speak specifically to our teachers or educators about the different categories of trauma that are manifested and what you have seen throughout your practice. Pastor Bailey?
Thank you very much for having me. It is indeed my pleasure, and I hope my contribution would add to the body of knowledge. Already, I feel like a student in Sonia Winter's class. With regard to categorization, she actually did an excellent job of speaking to what we call the acute, chronic, or complex. The only thing I would add to that, as my work in victim services would allow me to be exposed to, is a category which is important to bring to the attention of teachers, is what is called secondary trauma. Because we already understand what trauma is. She did an excellent job, and it can be acute, chronic, or complex. But while you're managing your traumatic realities, you face a classroom, a schoolroom with teachers, classroom with students, schoolroom with teachers. You live in a community, you live in a home. Perhaps you're a member of other communities, and they are experiencing their trauma, that they trust you because of your position as teacher, a principal, a guidance counselor. And then you now start to experience their trauma, what we call vicariously, by virtue of identifying with their needs and associating with them. And this can be a very, very serious, acute, if not chronic, because you're already dealing with some, and then the more they brought to you is the more complex it is. So this close contact can also impact. That is the only thing I would add to the categorization of trauma.
Okay, thank you so much, Pastor Bailey. And if I may just continue as a follow-up, because we, as educators, we're all educators, and we would have had first an experience of some form of trauma, but we are looking more specifically at this point at the psychological trauma. So as an educator, we know that traumatic stress impacts schools. And for decades, reports have really pointed out to the impact of violence in schools and the quality of education. Unfortunately, some of our teachers who work in volatile communities, they are subjected to acts of violence perpetuated by parents, students, and other members of the community. And we saw this in an article that was published by the Caribbean National Weekly in 2020. Given that teaching and learning, for the most part, is being facilitated virtually now, the incidents of abuse or attack are manifested in other ways, such as cyberbullying and threats. These are a few. My question, therefore, and I'm just going to throw this one out to one of our panelists, how do these traumatic episodes, you believe, would impact teachers' mental health? So we're looking at, these episodes of violence and teachers who work in volatile communities and who would have also been subjected to some form of trauma throughout their experience. I will just throw that one out to one of our panelists.
So as we spoke to the categories, vicarious, including, and so on.
Yeah.
Just summarily, some teachers, some persons, teachers, happen to develop high levels of resilience. And this high level of resilience, which may be good for them in one sense, can actually be manifested in what is become a stony character. So they are not as bubbly, they're slow to respond emotionally. It's a kind of emotional cutoff to cope. The challenge with emotional cutoff to cope is that you become emotionally cut off at school, online, and then you become emotionally cut off at home.
Yes.
And you literally become the emotional cut off person. all because you're trying to build resilience to cope.
Mhm.
Some people, unfortunately, don't build this resilience and they pretend to build it, so they suffer inside. And coupled with a perception that it is weak to seek help,
Yes.
or that you have enough help already because you're seeking.
Mhm.
Some people end up suffering severely, and the symptoms, if we get into that discussion, will
Mhm.
reflect the levels of severity of the symptoms that we see. So it is the resilience, which is good, which can lead
Yes.
to a bad, or the bad, which is to become weak and develop fears of being perceived as weak, so you hide and not seek help.
Very interesting. Thank you, Pastor Bailey. I will ask my colleague, Kiva, to weigh in on this question in terms of the traumatic episodes and how these impact teachers' mental health. And let us say educators, and not just restricted to teachers.
Yeah.
Kiva?
Hi, good night, everyone. Thanks for having me here. Just to shed a little light, it's a bit noisy in my background. Sorry about that. I want, because we have teachers here, we have to remember that teachers also are working with other colleagues that might not be here, children, parents. And so trauma on a whole does something to a person. If I know sometimes we think of trauma, we think of it in the big term of, something great that has happened, but trauma can be traumatic to the individual experiencing it. So it can be very subjective as well. Someone can come out of an accident and walk away quite fine, while another person is traumatized and cannot move. And why is that? So what does trauma do to a person? In a traumatic event, your body creates a stress response. So it sends off certain chemicals that then triggers you emotionally, mentally, and sometimes physically to respond in a certain way. And so persons start to behave in a certain way. And that's why, like Sonia said, you will have some persons who are mentally responding in a certain emotional kind of way, but then you have people that are responding in a physical way. And that's because what we've all heard of. A trauma will create a stress response, but that stress response will look like flight, fight, or freeze. And freeze just came into the frame in the last 5 to 10 years because people didn't really realize that this was an actual option. But you can be standing there totally frozen, immobilized because of what is going on in your head. So some persons will find that some people call it an adrenaline rush.
Yes.
And after you're done, and thus the shock of it all, and when the shock starts to recede hours or days later, you're like, did I do that? Yes. I can't believe I jumped over that fence. That fence is so high. I can't believe that I attacked the gunman. I've been in situations where the old lady said, I tell him the blood of Jesus, and I grab him. And yes. After days after, she was like, I cannot believe what was I thinking? But the chemical charges that occurs in the body causes us to respond in a certain way. Now, this can be like Reverend Bailey was saying, it can be good and it can be bad, because think about it, an adrenaline rush is now going to cause heightened blood pressure. It's now going to cause increased heart rate. It's now going to cause increased sweating. We're not necessarily noticing what is happening to our body in that traumatic event. We're not necessarily noticing. Sometimes our minds are on survival. Some persons have said that their minds aren't on anything. A teacher will tell you, I am standing there and I'm thinking, I need to get through this class. What has happened to Flo? Why can't I find my children? there are thoughts of solutions and not necessarily that I'm going through trauma. And you know, in the US, they say 1 in 3 persons have gone through trauma according to APA, but I think everybody in the world now can say I have gone through trauma because
Certainly.
this pandemic is traumatic.
Mhm,
Like Sonia was saying, there are losses that are going on all around us, loss of freedoms, you know, that we're experiencing, traumatic events. The persons are sitting in front of, you know, partners that they wish they really could go back to not seeing, except for a few hours per day. Children are a teacher sitting at a computer trying to teach with a dodgy flow network, and their child is sitting beside them having difficulties in the classroom, but they cannot help because they have their class to try and manage. And then after that, then they have to go and work with their child. Where is the freedom? Where is the me time? When do I come home from work? When is home?
Yeah.
So trauma is all around, but I'm not sure all teachers are necessarily seeing that they're experiencing trauma. And thus, they might not actually be taking the steps needed to actually work through that trauma.
Right.
And so that is another issue. So what's going on with you? Where do you find yourself? Do you find that you are overly anxious? Do you find that you're overly stressed? Because trauma causes a stress response. So where do you find yourself when you're thinking, you know, so some persons have found that they're thinking more along the lines of burnout. They can't stand to see the children. If they get another piece of work to mark, if another agenda comes from the Ministry of Education that I should do, I am just going to flip. So they're finding that some of their behavioral responses are giving them a clue that something is happening here.
We're going to delve a little deeper, though. You know, very interesting. I'm sure. Yes, I'm sure our educators are.
I know you're trying to rush, but given the trajectory, because we're psychologists, sometimes we take some things for granted, which I think we should summarily say. If you don't mind me quickly saying this.
Right, and then what I will do, Pastor Bailey, is to, because we're going to delve deep into it, and we're happy that these things are coming forward. But I'm going to allow you to share briefly, and then I'm going to hand over to Dr. Walker.
Yes. So quickly, teachers and educators, you may, especially in these times, some of the quick 1, 2, 3 signs. Physical weaknesses and sicknesses that are not medically connected. Sure, you have COVID and you don't have COVID, it's your accident. The lack of interest in pleasure. And in all its forms. The lack of energy to do what you normally do. Sleep disturbances, appetite disturbances, you don't feel for things, you don't know what to eat, nothing tastes good again to you, and so on. The emotional rides that you go on, the retelling of the experiences you're having. Now, it's okay to tell, but when you're constantly telling the persons you live with, I'm having this problem, and they're hearing it over and over, and you hear them saying that, you have to become mindful of the things you're having. I think these are some of the very simple, practical, physical things as a teacher you should try to do.
Great. So let's continue the conversation.
You permit me
I think Ms. Winter wants to comment. Go ahead, Ms. Winter.
Thank
you. Not going to mention
I would love to add to that list, though, that to the extent that you are in the classroom and you feel disconnected emotionally and you go home and you're disconnected from your family, it means your resilience is failing you. Your coping is not working for you, and you are suffering also the ill effects of whatever stresses you're exposed to. If you're almost emotionally labile, you can't connect with anybody at home, you're suffering. You are having a challenge here that you need support with.
This kind of thing is serious. Yes.
Dr. Walker, you want to continue?
Yes, that's a perfect segue to my question. I really want to welcome, or let me say, EduTalk would like to welcome all our guests here this evening. We do have guests here in Canada and elsewhere, as well as Jamaica. So we welcome you. So we're focused today on trauma and the teachers' mental health. But as we have explained already, we know that there are persons here who are not teachers, but they're also educators in other areas.
Right.
Just to really expound in our previous session, our panelists, which comprised of teachers, guidance counselors, and of course, we had a psychologist, Dr. Earl Brown. We all had a conversation about mental health. And one of the things that came up too, a panelist actually recounted her painful experience with trauma and how the experience continued to impede her ability to adequately guide her students who actually will be, seeking her help. So I'm going to direct this question to Mrs. Winter, because you would just touch on the topic and then the other panelists can join in. But we have so many questions and we know the conversation is rich, but all the recommendations that I also heard Reverend Bailey and others were intimated as well. We just have to hold them a little bit because we're going to go to the end section where we'll ask you to delve further. But my question to you, Mrs. Winter, is that in addition to guidance counselors, teachers, they extend these emotional support, as I mentioned earlier, to students. So why is it really important that teachers understand the impact of such care on their mental health? And earlier, Pastor Bailey, he mentioned the importance of teachers recognizing what we call secondary trauma. So can you just expound on that, Mrs. Winter? Thank you so much.
Okay, the thing about it is if any of these events is having an impact on their mental health, it is going to impact their functioning. And that's why they need to understand it. It means that they're not going to be functioning their best in the classroom. They're in the classroom and they want to be supporting kids, teaching kids, inspiring kids. They're not going to be able to do that if they are impaired by traumatic experience, by vicarious trauma. Okay. Similarly, at home, they're not going to. I think of your functioning in different domains. Your professional life. Are you functioning at your best there, or are you disconnected? Are you tired? Are you experiencing fatigue? Are you not performing at your best in your professional world? Number one, that's why you need to understand. That's one of the consequences of the impact on your mental health of trauma. Similarly, in your personal life, if personal health care, if you're not taking care of yourself, you're not eating right, you're binging on something or starving yourself, or fried foods or that sort of a thing. It's almost like an addiction, the way you eat. If you're noticing, we spoke about difficulties with sleeping. You're surfing all night long to almost escape. So you're robbing yourself of restorative sleep. You're not exercising, you're putting on weight, losing a lot of weight. Your basic health care sometimes. Some people suffer so much that they don't even, I've had a teacher where it was her family that had to say to her, my dear, you have not washed your hair in 3 weeks. That's how we know that something is wrong. Self-care can start to suffer. Your relationships at home start to suffer. You're not interested in anybody. You're irritable. You pick a fight. You're not patient. So if trauma or any of these stressful events impacts your mental health, the big thing about it is that it's going to impact your functioning in these different domains. And that's why it's very important to understand it and to get to be aware of it, to see it when it's coming, and to get the help that you need.
Thank you so much. Any of our other psychologists would like to add? Keval, you'd like to add anything there, or?
So it's just to realize that the unpredictable emotions are going to come out. Things that you're supposed to be happy, you're speaking with a child, but then you feel sad and you start to cry and you're wondering what is happening here. It's not just about the stress. Okay, so a lot of the symptomology that we're talking about, and so if you pick up on what
Miss Winter? Dr. Winter.
Please call me Sonia. It would make me considerably more comfortable.
So what Sonia was saying is that depression is one of the outcomes of trauma. And you have a PTSD as well. That is another outcome of trauma. So that overeating, undereating, insomnia, oversleeping, all of those come under depression, but you have to look out for the PTSD reactions, the unpredictable emotions, the flashbacks, while you're sitting there teaching, because there are cues that are around you that can trigger something. And then all of a sudden you're right back there and you will have that stress response again. You will have that trigger, and you will feel like, okay, this is happening all over again. And it depends on what those triggers are. And so there is strained relationships, because all of a sudden, you start thinking that person's around you don't necessarily understand, or you start hiding things away, and you're pulling away from others, which then comes back under the depression and the withdrawal. And then you have physical symptoms like headaches and nausea, because you are stressing out your body. Think about it. If you're having these responses continuously, what's happening to your body? What's happening to your heart? What's happening to your cortisol level? And then the knock-on impact on your physical body. And so, yeah, you might not have COVID, but you might actually end up in the hospital being admitted because the trauma isn't seen and the trauma isn't worked through. So we have to really look out for both symptoms of depression, symptoms of PTSD, anything outside of the norm. Use it as a red flag to say, what is going on with me? What is going on with this person around me? Because some of us are not necessarily experiencing trauma, but we might be around people that are. So it's for us to, if we're not using it for ourselves, to still know the information so that we can help others around us in their time of need. So it's just picking up on what these symptoms are that we're talking about constantly, and so on, so that we will be able to pick it up if we start noticing it with ourselves or we start noticing it with others.
Thank you so much. All right. So before you mentioned earlier about COVID, and I have a question for Sonia. She said we should call her Sonia, so I'm going to just do that. So Sonia, your organization, Tea House Therapy, it actually provides a gamut of services for Jamaicans, and I know that you offer service internationally as well. So in addition to couples therapy, your team supports individuals struggling with anxiety, difficult thoughts, depression, memories, among others. So in your most recent interview, because, we had to do our research on all of our panelists. So in your most recent interview on Television Jamaica, you talked about death and despair. And with some of our nation's teachers, we know that they have actually died from COVID. We know a few of them, or they may have even lost someone from this virus. So can you explain how the trauma, from losing someone to such, deadly virus, how can it affect teachers' mental health?
Yeah. Well, I just want to say that at Tea House Therapy, the practice that I run, a huge number of our clients right now are survivors of COVID or have lost loved ones to COVID. Okay. And what's happening is that the degree of distress that they're feeling is morphing into complex grief. That's just keeping them completely paralyzed. The thing about it is dealing with death of a loved one is very difficult to begin with, okay? Because we have to confront existential questions, and of the person, how we're going to live going on without this person, and also we confront our own mortality as well, and that's extremely anxiety inducing. It's like you never have to figure out what happens after death. You never think about what happens after death until you've lost somebody who's really close to you, okay? And quite often the answers that we've gotten all along the way up to now have held us, and suddenly when we lose this special person, those answers don't fit for us anymore, okay? So it's a very anxiety inducing, amongst many other emotions, of course, which are part of grief, just a death in and of itself. The thing about COVID is that it brings other stressors to the fray, okay? Number one, the death is often very sudden. And I'm speaking not only from research, because there's been so much research since the beginning of COVID, a huge ferment of studies, but also from what's happening in my practice. The death is often very sudden. People are not ailing for months and months and months. They were up and hearty, and then within 2 weeks, they've contracted the illness, been in hospital and died. Number one. So the suddenness and shock of it is traumatic, is trauma inducing. Number two, the circumstances of the death, which oftentimes family members are witnessing, okay, because they are, virtually, seeing their family member in hospital. At least a number of my clients, they're speaking to them or WhatsApp video and so on, and they can see the difficulty that they're in. They can see how hard it is to breathe. They're witnessing the loss of this person and how distressing it is. And then from a distance, they cannot even be there to hold their hand, to comfort them. That is traumatic. And it brings on feelings of guilt, regret, helplessness. Already they're gonna have survivor's guilt, okay? But just being away and not being able to be with their loved one creates additional stress and trauma. Then of course, and I must add this, I have several men within my practice, and I think teachers can relate to this, right? I have several men who are part of my clientele who are, the first thing about them is, number one, they are the sole breadwinners of their family, number one. So they have a protective image of themselves already. Their identity is that I'm the provider and protector of this household, number one, okay? Their wives were stay-at-home wives. They went going in and out, they contracted COVID, brought it home, they survived COVID, and their wife did not. You can't, so they're going to have survivor's guilt even without the variable of COVID involved. Okay? But now they feel like conduit of this disease and this person's death. I cannot tell you what the kind of distress that those gentlemen are going through at this moment. Okay, so the circumstances are extremely traumatic as well. The fact that also we can't have the closing rituals, the celebratory rituals that we're used to in the way that we used to, because that really helps us to confront and start us to accept the process of acceptance and closure, and this being a reality, funerals and Thanksgiving services, 9 nights, all of those things. They have been so constrained that our ability to culturally process our emotions has been robbed of us, and that in itself as well causes COVID to exacerbate the natural and legitimate feelings of grief that individuals would feel at this time. Right. And I'm getting very engaged and emotional, because just to see and in your nature of transference, because so many people are experiencing, so many families are going through this right now, you know what I mean? And that's, I hope I've answered the question. Sorry.
Oh, this is fine, Sonia. Thank you for that very detailed explanation. We're going to move to Reverend Bailey to find out his opinion, particularly as it relates to death and coping. I think in my capacity as working in children mental health, there's a lot of delayed mourning and grief that's going to come out of this pandemic, especially since, as we know, we typically have the opportunity to celebrate and to mourn for so long in the comfort of our families and of our friends. So Reverend Bailey, in your capacity as pastor and psychologist, can you briefly explain the role that spirituality also plays in supporting coping with death, but also mental health that's caused by trauma or the loss of a loved one?
Okay, so let me add to, if I can, to Sonia's thing. One of the things that teachers and persons in that line of authority feels is that they are giving so much to their community, their homes, their families. And the sense of, given what I'm giving, I should get a break. So when they now suffer a loss, a pain, a trauma as a result of anything, given how much they are giving, it sometimes becomes difficult for them to accept and feel doubly cheated. It also happens particularly for those who are Christians or have a religious terms of reference. The feeling that I have prayed and I have trusted and I am giving, I should get a free pass from some of the pain that is associated. And so there is a struggle indeed for persons. But I want to quickly say that every person with a religious persuasion, I happen to be Christian, But whatever your religious persuasion is, it is important at all times, especially in these times, to remind yourself constantly of who and what the source is and what your source can do. So for us Christians, the word says, do not be afraid, for I am with you. And it says, cast all your cares. However, I quickly seek to use every ounce of my theology and my psychology to remind that being a Christian does not make one impervious from trauma or the impact of trauma. No more than being a Christian prevent you from getting a puncture, right? You can pray, we can pray all we want for our cars. There's no guarantee in that we're going to get a puncture. And so I would want us to bear in mind that what I know is that wherever the puncture leads, whether in this life or the next, hold on to your faith, which has the capacity to take you through that element of the trauma. So I think our faith is critical. There are also a stigma, which is difficult, particularly for people of faith. So it is believed that it's because you're weak and you're not a good Christian why you're suffering. It is also a sign that perhaps it's a demon or some, in Jamaica we talk about obia, that has taken you while you're going through this. Some
supposed
people
to pray it away.
Yeah, some people are afraid to tell other people that they are going through mental challenges or difficulty, because people actually feel that you can catch it by coming near to you. So you don't want anybody to know you're going through this. Some people believe it's a sign of retribution, and you don't want anybody to tell you, so you're getting what you deserve and it's karma, so you don't say anything. Some people believe that somehow you can make it worse by associating with some people, so you stay away far. Some believe that home remedies and prayers will always solve all the problems, so I don't need to share and seek help. And a number of other things that happens that causes people of faith in particular to struggle through when they have particularly mental illness. One person actually, I've been in class, several persons have said mental illness is not real, and the blood of Jesus, which I happen to believe in has power, can prevent them. If they only know how many mental ill teachers have been treated by our practices.
Wow.
Okay. Thank you very much for that comment. And I really appreciate how, I don't want to say although, but even though you are a Christian and a reverend, you're still advocating for mental health services, because oftentimes those conversations, I know in Jamaica, seem incompatible. Even conversations about meditation and seeking other forms of professional help. So thank you for this particular approach to the question, so we can hopefully see more Christians take an active role, in addition to forming a community of practice to better their mental health, having more nuanced conversations around mental health and seeking that assistance, or even being of assistance. The isolation, as you spoke to, Reverend, is so real. Thinking that, oh, this person is mad, and you're staying away from mad people without practicing good Christian values and being caring neighbors and following up on our loved ones or members of our churches or community. I will now move on to discussions, but in terms of the recommendations. But before we do so, Kevin, is there anything that you would like to add in terms of the intersectionalities between Christianity or faith, as well as the implications, particularly in the Jamaican context around services or the lack of access or seeking out services?
Not necessarily in the seeking out services. I've found that churches have become more open. Not necessarily church as a body, but individuals inside churches have become more open to the fact that there are other persons out there, just like we have physical illnesses. We might be struggling mentally, and God has provided them with a certain set of skills and for a certain set of interests that will then help me to move forward. I think it's being destigmatized. Even as the shock of Sagicor having it on their list of services, you start to see where Jamaica is opening up. More persons, even during COVID, more clients, more persons are reaching out for assistance. And it's not just because there's a new song being sung about psychosocial, but persons are seeing the need and they're seeing the benefits of actually reaching out. And I think, interestingly enough, I think the intersection between Christianity, faith, because it doesn't have to be Christianity, faith and mental illness is actually a good one, because there is that hope. There is that if you believe that you have purpose in this time, it refuses your mind to be paralyzed, to just stop, to just become immobilized, to freeze. You don't even fight against the thing. You start seeing strategies. And this is how the recommendations start to come into play, because I can tell you all day long, run, do some jogging, and it will increase your serotonin levels. And so it will be easier to cope. You will sit there all day knowing that this is what you should do, and you will never implement it. But if you believe you have purpose, these children were always going to be in front of me for me to teach during COVID. Oh, let me get up and go do that little jogging up, because it will make me more alert. It will make me more positive. So I find Christianity and faith and that spirituality actually lends itself to a more positive mindset, a more positive outlook. It helps us to cope better, because there's a different perspective, there's a different outlook. So yes, it can have, all coins have two sides. But yeah, sometimes we use it to say, make we pray through, God now make me go through this. But sometimes after we settle for a bit and we do some deep breathing, we go, okay, then if God is still God, and it's the God I said 2019 before COVID, then God is still existing now. Therefore, if God says this is what is going to happen, how do I go through this? Because if I'm still here, then I need to go through. And so spirituality actually brings us some hope, brings us a bit of gratitude, brings us a bit of positivity, and we actually start finding the resources and the things that we need in order to cope well, in order to go through the trauma, go through the stresses, go through the depression and the anxiety.
For me personally, if I can just quickly say this for me.
Reverend Baylor, 1 second. I see Sonia's Reverend.
No matter how sick I am, personally, I am going to go to a doctor for help. If my car is sick, I'm going to go to a mechanic, not a pastor. I'm okay with my pastor, and faith is everything to me. If I'm going to fly, I go away, I would rather see a trained pilot and not a prayer warrior, not just a prayer warrior pilot in the plane. I'm cool with him being a prayer warrior, but if I'm going to fly, I want to have a pilot license too, So with that said, when you have a problem, you can seek a professional, If I'm drowning, I really don't want somebody who's just a Christian. I want somebody who can swim.
Okay, Sonia, I see you had a point too.
Thank you so much. I was chomping at the bit.
I saw you were able to
because Dr. Hardway, I want you to permit me to look at intersectionality from its flip side, thinking of intersectionality more as a partnership between resources. And I want to share with you that I started my career at Family Life Ministries, and I still serve there. I do certain clinics there once a week. But Family Life Ministries is a fantastic, it's not a plug for Family Life, but it's a fantastic example of the partnership between faith and the church and mental health advocacy services, right? Because a lot of people walk in through the door because it says, because our name is Family Life Ministries, and they immediately get a sense of comfort and trust. But when they come in, it is clinical psychologists and counseling psychologists that they're going to meet there, who have the fantastic opportunity to leverage their skills, leverage their pilot skills and their quad skills to help these individuals.
Life coach.
It's a wonderful partnership. And Family Life is like the largest practice in the Caribbean, as far as I understand, in terms of it. They have, I think, over 40 counselors, and their client base is huge. But I just feel it's a wonderful way that we have leveraged the trust that the church has in our community to educate people and to give them opportunities to get help.
Okay, thank you very much for saying that and plugging Family Life. Thank you. I'll hand over. I heard Kevin was talking about Flo, and I was like, Flo, please, if you do see a letter from us. But let's go over to Dr. Walker. Dr. Walker.
Thank you so much. I'm going to now ask Sonia a question. So it's a bit of a follow-up, but taking us into another direction. So we know that the late Professor Hickling, he died recently, has been a strong advocate for, looking at the stigma around mental health and ensuring that there is more education around that. And so my question to you this evening is, what best practices then would you recommend? Because we're actually in the recommendations segment of it. We're winding down. We have like 4 minutes to the hour, and we'd like to take even a few questions. So the question is, what best practices would you recommend to be implemented in schools to help teachers with mental health issues? So it's not just to say what teachers can do personally, but what best practices would you recommend? I'm going to ask all of our panelists to give just a few pointers, because we have a few more additional recommendations where you can actually infuse.
Okay, Dr. Walker, if you would permit me, please, I would love to defer to my colleagues who are actually in the school setting, if that's okay, and spare you my hypothetical thinking, as I'm not actually on the front line. So may I hand over to my colleagues who are right there and are probably better equipped than me.
Perfect. So Keva, or
Keva, yes, Keva.
You can go ahead.
All right. So the question is, what best practices can we utilize in terms of dealing with trauma? All right. So first of all, surround yourself. Start finding your support network. Start finding the people that can support you. I always say, everybody who's heard me do a presentation, I always tell them, work towards people's strengths. If you know your friend is a gossip, don't use them as a confidant. If you know you're a feel-good person, yes, use them when you need a feel-good time. Work towards people's strengths. They're in your life for a reason. Yes, they bring something to the table. Work towards that. I was with some teachers day before yesterday, and I remember one teacher just highlighting that having a safe place was excellent for her. Having the freedom to just be, having the freedom to just say, I am just not doing well today. Or having the freedom to just say, guess what? I need a hug. It's a safe environment with no judgments, and you have to have that network for it. So find your network, find your people. And this comes under self-care as well, doesn't it, Sonia? So in building your self-care, you build your self-care around your people. So who is a part of your self-care program? Who do you have a number for, that can hold you accountable? No, you are not going to do that today, because like we said before, sometimes we have some strained relationships, we have some inappropriate responses in terms of behavior. You need some people to hold you accountable. Also, start with some things that will help you mentally. Your exercise, it releases that serotonin. It causes you to be more positive. As opposed to going to the doctor that going to charge you, to give you the drug, do a little walk up the road. If you can't get to the jogging, start the walking. Do some tag, play tag outside with your family. Get the kids outside to exercise as well. You know, that little burst of energy for half an hour, even 3 times per week, actually makes you feel a bit better. You approach things a bit better. Check it out the next time you do it. You will see that that person that bumps into your trolley in the supermarket, you don't get so upset anymore because your mind is at a different place. Do your deep breathing exercise. Do your guided imagery. So these are tools that you can use to just help to calm the mind. So you're supporting yourself, you're calming the mind, do some self-talk. This is where your I ams. What do they call them again? Sorry, I call them I ams. Your
affirmation, self-affirmation.
There we are. Do your affirmations. I have purpose. You can see that Shawnee does this all the time. Shawnee knows where we're going, you know.
I also meditate too, so I stay in the present.
I am a good person. I am intelligent. So when the problems come, you go, I am intelligent. I can sort this out. You know, I am determined. When flow disappears, you know, okay, flow went yesterday. I'm a determined person.
Flow again.
You get some resources together, ask the parents to pick them up when they're passing school, because you know who you are. You start to become, like Sonia has been saying, more resilient. It creates that bounce back ability. Because life going lick you down, you know, it's not that we're saying life not going to happen and trauma isn't occurring. We know trauma occurring.
Keva, can you just perhaps direct, you know, we have Principal Trevor here.
Right.
As principal of his institution, what can he implement in his school? Not just to say,
right,
what can he implement, like, let's say, as a policy within his school that he can use? Because my own personal research, I know that while we have been trying our best to do and to help educators, you know, we don't have a policy in place to support educators' mental health.
While Keva is capturing her thoughts, if you don't mind, because I happen to work as the director for victim services. Schools have called us. Trevor, I suspect you might soon be calling us too. Wasn't it your school and sadly that a teacher is missing? I'm not sure.
Yes, from Marcus Garvey.
Okay, so in your area.
Yes.
And we have had to be called in many times to help schools to structure some form of intervention. Unfortunately, it is after the fact. So we have always encouraged principals and schools to have some form of a trauma screening tool readily available.
Yeah.
Trauma is not going to be always a physical thing that you can see, but if the simple emotional screening tool to see what is the range of, you can even call persons like victim services in the Ministry of Justice, and they will give you their tool to use. You don't have to go reinvent it, and it does not only identify the range of emotions, it gives you an opportunity to measure projectively how much of the emotions is being perceived. Schools need to have an emergency response protocol to trauma. Whatever trauma is most common in your area, whether it's shootings, accidents, whatever it is, unfortunate things like molesting of children, domestic violence, have a set of protocol. Who you go to, who is called, what is the next step. In schools that are particularly prone to violence, have what is called a safe space in that school. When gunshot is ringing out left, right, and center, you don't know where they're coming from. It's good to have a pre-planned where to run to, at least during the time of the shooting, and you are here, you know that you are reasonably safe, and you know where to run. So that needs to be worked out. So in the mind of everybody, I know where I need to go. I also think that there are, perhaps respond to another one of the questions, there are government resources, victim services I just mentioned is free in every parish. And they are professionally trained to come and assess what is happening in your school and provide you with intervention that might be very helpful for you. I know the guidance counselors unit in the Ministry of Education, they have a response tool, but if by policy they need to perhaps speak to preemptive response, because there's a trauma quotient that is now everywhere, that you don't need to wait until the blood is running before you respond. You can actually go now. You know, the level of crime, the level of violence, the level of isolation due to COVID, we really should be out there holding your guys' hands and helping you to navigate what is happening. And, you know, just to get a clean bill of health in the screening tool, if I might call it that, is good enough, because you know now from the tool that you're not so bad, you know, and you feel more safe instead of those generally unsafe everywhere.
I see Sonia's ribbon to go.
Sonia goes, so I can just finish off.
A mental health tool. In my practice, we are starting this program called a checkup from the neck up. I like that, where we're having asking people, you know, you do your regular checkup, just call us, we do your mental health check with you just to see how are you really coping. So I like that that buzz line. But also I do want to just mention something that I think I have participated in that has helped. I think creating a safe space emotionally involves talking about mental health issues and the genesis of mental health in the school. And I know a number of schools have invited me to come in regularly to do talks. And getting it out in the open, and it's just for the teachers and a second group just for the students, you know, and it's interactive where you get to freely say it's okay to talk about this. And I think that plants the seed for saying it's safe here. This is a safe space to talk about things mental health related as well, I think.
Train your children and teachers in what we call basic counseling skills. It is not a degree, it's not even a diploma, it's not even a certificate. First aid. First aid in basic skills, which covers the basics. Identifying what is extreme, how to at least initiate some response. So you have a team now in your environment instead of on a few guidance counselors' shoulders. It's a tremendous opportunity when you have peer counselors. Plus, some people will tell other people their problems that they won't tell other people.
That's so true.
Okay, but I think you had something to add, because I know the ministry pumped, I think, was it 34 million into some of those services? I did see a newspaper article in which you commented on the services. So maybe also discussing the infusion of capital into these services.
After Kevin responds, I want to direct a question to Sonia quickly, and then we move on to Trevor with a quick question, and then we give our participants an opportunity to talk. Go ahead, Kevin.
Right. So I know that the Return to Happiness rollout was there as well. I think we could actually utilize it in the school setting. It has been beneficial for those who have been exposed to it, and it is built for trauma. So, you know, it is a tool that has been funded, teachers have been trained, and it's so for other persons, not just guidance counselors, to actually have this tool there that they can use with children. And it preempts, it's not reactive, it can be a proactive, where you're checking in even from the neck up, as Sonia says, but it's a way to check in with children, to know what's going on with them, and to actually help them to just navigate this COVID period. And then also, every region has a JTA officer. Now, this officer has the links for the counselors that are available in every parish that JTA has on call for teachers to use. So I know over in our section, Principal Trevor, you have Mr. Devon Meek, who is the JTA, who, if a principal finds that a teacher, and here we go again with safe space, so it's seeing what is happening. So the principal might have to say, okay, what's going on with you? Would you like to speak to someone outside of us? And then provide them with that counselor's number that they can actually get services. So it's finding that safe space inside and working, like Reverend Bailey has said, just like how you have fire drills. If you're in a volatile community, have your safety drills, but also even if you're not in volatile communities, how do you create that space and speak openly, like Sonia was saying? openly about mental health issues, so that person can feel free about saying, you know, today I'm not having such a good mental health day. Because kids, teachers, they might not know what it is, they just feel off. And it's giving them that space to say, I feel off. All right, do you want to just sit out? What can you do in that space? Have you tried your deep breathing? So there's an arsenal, there's a toolkit that is provided as well, just like how you have a first aid kit, where a person's not feeling so well, they run down the toolkit. I've tried this in a miss, but it's still not working. Principal can say, what do we do next? So almost like a little checklist as well, with those tools, like you have your Beck's depression inventory that is free and tells you what is happening. That can easily be done. You have your SAD scale that you can actually do. If they, depending on what they're ticking, you start seeing, okay, you are expressing hopelessness. You are having thoughts about suicide. What do we do next? And like Reverend Bailey says, actually have a plan in place. You know, suicide is on the rise. That has come out from COVID started. You know, persons feel like it's doomsday, going back to that spirituality. It's the end of the world. You know, you'll hear many people of faith saying that as well, that, you know, this seems to be the end times and the vaccine is the mark of the beast.
Yes, yes, that was very,
you know, it is going around and people's mindsets won't change. So what do we put in place for all eventualities? And we might not cover everything, but the dominant voices that are out there, we can put together something that we can actually apply some protocol and some strategies in order to reduce the adverse effects that have been going on.
Yeah, Kevin, you're still on the floor. You're still on the floor. We want to just keep you there a little
bit. Before she runs, there are also a lot of free online manuals, actually free online manuals that can help a school, a principal, just to explore ideas. They're very simple to, you don't really require a degree in psychology to find some helpful tools. And they're free. That's the good thing about it.
And that is why it's good that
online to find out mindfulness things and so on. So if you check therapy tools, and you'll see headings, depression, anxiety. You can utilize them as well.
So that is why it's so good for us to have sessions like these, where we're not only exploring the issues, but we're also looking at recommendations. And from all our panelists, all of you have shared important recommendations that we can all employ. I know that on the platform now, I have a number of teachers from St. Anne's Primary, teachers from other schools in the region, teachers across the board who are here. They're listening, they're understanding as well. But I wanted to just continue the conversation with Keva a little, because I know that globally, most of the policy initiatives have privileged children and students' well-being, while neglecting that of the educators. As principal, I am cognizant of the efforts of the Ministry of Education, Youth and Information, though some of it insufficient to provide support to our teachers. So we're seeing that things are changing, and COVID has really expedited some of that, and for us to look with a closer eye at the issue and how we can provide support. So we want to look at long term. So yes, we have had some recommendations, valuable things like screening toolkits and so forth, establishing emergency protocols and safe space. But what about long-term and some of the reforms that we can look at in terms of recommendation, not only here to our government in Jamaica, but internationally as well? So Kevin, maybe you could take that on in terms of long-term support and policy reform initiatives also that we could look at.
So this is totally my own perspective. I'm not speaking on behalf of the ministry or anything, but I think that if we're going to implement, we probably should upskill and train.
Yeah.
A lot of frustrations and traumatic responses are coming from teachers because they have just been thrown in a deep end of a pool and told swim. even though they've never seen water before. And so in going forward, we probably want to do that. Any policies that we are going to put in place, any changes that we're going to see, probably upskill and train our teachers first. Open dialogue and communication, and not just sending memorandums. It helps people to have a buy-in into the process as well, and it reduces frustrations, and it helps the principals and so on to work with their teachers to know what they need. Remember, trauma comes out of this whole notion as well of lack of control. It's unpredictable, it's uncontrollable. There's nothing I could do about it. But if I am able, we know when hurricane season is coming, even though we don't know if we're getting a hurricane. And the weather system and the weatherman comes and he says, okay, we might get flood. And we run to the supermarket and we get none.
Start to prepare.
We get a chance to prepare. We might, and so it gives us a sense of control. When we have that sense of control, it can reduce our trauma response. And so some of these things might need to be in our policies. Before implementation, should we have a committee first to discuss it? Should we give teachers 2 weeks notice of any implementation of anything, and so on? But even from a principal's perspective, do we know the challenges because you're the middle manager, you're on the ground, but you're getting from on high, but you have the opportunity to see what's going on amongst your staff and actually start pulling out the protocols. So this is not for now. This is not a now let's do check-ins. It's a going into how often do we do that now becomes the question. Every 3 months we do check-ins, COVID or no COVID, where are my teachers at? Because people are going through things in their own personal lives that they're now taking back to the workspace, whether we stay online or we go into face-to-face. Trauma is all around us, and trauma is being experienced in different ways. So I say, take the same things that we are working with and actually make them into policies, make them into things that we have. We have a response team for suicide. We have a response team for crisis. We have a response team, and not just, okay, when the pandemic goes, we throw these things away because we're no longer having trauma.
Okay, thank you. Go ahead, Dr. Walker. I think you're wrapping us up now because we want to leave space for the questions. So I think you have a question to ask Miss Sonia as well as Reverend, and then we'll wrap up for questions. Thank you very much for that very detailed explanation. I'm sure Principal Cole, Trevor, you're taking notes and you're ready to implement and advocate on behalf of your teachers. Go ahead, Dr. Walker.
All right, thank you so much, Kiva. So Sonia, I'm going to direct my question to you, and then I'm going to ask Rev to also chime in as well. We're quite aware, and you all, all of you did alluded to the whole idea around the trauma and etc. and the memories that can occur. But we're quite aware that some of our teachers are dealing with, or they're even struggling with, memories of traumatic events in their personal lives. And you all mentioned that. But the research indicates that when individuals experience prolonged stress from traumatic events, their memory processes can be altered. And Sonia, I know that your work actually looks at this area around memories and stuff. So can you just tell us some strategies that you would essentially recommend for teachers who have memories of traumatic events?
Okay, the thing about memories of traumatic events is that they can often trigger what we call flashbacks, that sort of a thing. And the flashback is not so much the problem, but it's the effect it has on you. It all comes back down to functioning, So I do have some clients who they experience flashbacks, but they know how to ground themselves, they know how to settle themselves, and they can continue with what they're doing. But for teachers, when these memories are triggered by events and it paralyzes them and impacts their functioning. So I think it was Kiva who mentioned earlier that, you're dealing with a child and suddenly you just collapsing into tears. That means your functioning as a teacher and a caregiver is being impaired. That's a problem. That's when the memories themselves are now a problem. And it's because they're being triggered. And so it's what in my practice, what I would help people to do is educate themselves about their own triggers so that they know the circumstances, the interpersonal dynamics, the settings, the types of conversations that are going to trigger them. They have a full knowledge of what their particular trigger is. Sorry, yes, they know what their particular trigger is, and they also understand the genesis of it, why that is a trigger for them. So it's a kind of educational process. And hopefully, I mean, ideally teachers should get professional help if the memories are impairing their functioning. But the route to helping them is helping them to understand how triggers work, what their particular triggers are, so that now, when these memories are triggering emotional responses that make them feel so overwhelmed, number one, they're able to know the signs that they're triggered. So they know that in their particular case, what are the physiological experiences they're going to have. Some people, their chest feel tight, they feel a lump in their throat, their head feels like it's pounding, they feel like their chest is going to tingling in the arms, they feel like they're going to faint. So you help them to identify how they know that they're being triggered, or they have certain thoughts, that sort of a thing. And then you give them a language to say to themselves, I am being triggered. Okay, that's the hardest part, believe it or not, you know, because your you know, your emotional centers, your amygdala is really in control of you, and it's hard to reactivate your executive functioning of your prefrontal cortex. And that's what's required now, to name the experience that you're having. Okay, the next thing you do is to take some space. You know, you need a little time to catch your breath. Just today, somebody called me and they had an accident, and they had reached home now, and they were having a full-fledged panic attack. And I said to them, take the space. Nothing is going to spoil. Okay, just take a few hours, do nothing, and calm yourself. Go and watch, turn on some nice music, do some deep breathing. Take the time to just calm yourself, be good to yourself, hug yourself, squeeze yourself, something that's taking care of you. And I love the phrase, nothing is going to spoil, just take a little time for yourself. Okay, so that's take space. Once you know you're being triggered, you know you can't do nothing good, you're going to make a mess of anything that you engage in. Take a little time for yourself. Okay, then we have this quick little rough and ready thing about shifting your state. Okay, and to do that, it's almost giving them different grounding skills. I think even Kiva referred to them, you know, deep breathing, trying to do guided imagery, muscle relaxation, something that can help bring down their heart rate, help take them out of that hypervigilant state, okay, and calm them. And then so that kind of shifts their state. That's step 3. And then step 4 is help them to become now present. Dr. Hardware, I heard you talking about mindfulness and bringing you back to the present.
Oh, yes, I have to meditate 3 times a day.
And can you imagine if you could teach it? Oh my goodness, I would go. I mean, the most rewarding experience for me would be to teach teachers mindfulness exercises. I mean, I would get a rush out of that, can I tell you? But it helps them to come back to the present, because what's happening is that their memory is taking them to a different time zone. Either back to the past, trauma of the event, or they're predicting that something is going to happen in the future. And so you give them mindfulness skills to bring them back to the present. And the present probably means there's a child in front of me who needs my attention right now. What is the best response? So that's a kind of rough and ready step, you know, being able to identify what's happening to you, put it in a category and name, because that starts to separate you from the experience. You're no longer the experience, you're experiencing something. So you put it in a category and name. That's step 1. 2, you take some time, because nothing not going to spoil. Take a little time for yourself. Do something, calm yourself. Okay, try and shift your mood by you know, mindfulness, deep breathing, muscle relaxation, guided imagery. That's step 3. And 4, come back to the present moment. We need you here. We need you here and now with our kids. And you can only do that if your mind is back here. And that's a kind of step ladder process to help deal with memories that can trigger you.
Sonia, you have to go publish that one. Hopefully you publish it and develop a toolkit. Okay.
Let me into the classroom, please. Let me just hug up the teachers and teach them mindfulness I'd love to do that.
Oh, okay.
And an invitation is coming to you.
Yes,
Soon as the
careful.
primary.
Teachers
And
over
it is
there.
coming to you.
That's what us Jones in for.
Okay, so Reverend Bailey, you get the last word before we invite questions.
Perhaps I thought while Sonia was speaking of the crisis that normally is associated with I am failing, I'm not doing a good job, which is associated with somebody, you have a set of values, a set of projections, a set of perceptions that you just use to measure yourself, and then you come out of it feeling I'm not doing a good job. So I'm talking about the whole self-actualization component of all of this. Maybe somewhere in this whole process needs to be added the importance of setting a new set of dimensions and goals and parameters that will determine whether you're failing or you're not failing. And if you can set them, helps the self-disclosure to somebody who can help you to realize, look, so you are here feeling I'm the worst teacher in the world, I'm going through this trauma. Then you come into a session that says, all of us are going through this. And you are actually the teacher of the class, that you are the best among us. So you really need to come into the sense of resetting what you value, what you use to measure yourself, what you call failure, and so on. It may require that, no, it's going to require some self-disclosure, which Sonia mentioned too. So you need to get yourself in a atmosphere where you can trust. And I think I heard Kiva mention that atmosphere. So that's the only thing I'd add, self-actualization, by finding another set of parameters to measure yourself. When I was a young boy, for example, I was told by one boy in the school I was the ugliest student he has ever seen. And for 1 year, I walk around holding down my head till a little young lady in the girls' school tell me I'm one of the sweetest boys she has ever seen.
Is that your wife?
So I learned I must find a different perspective to measure myself.
Okay.
And Reverend, you know how that self-actualization and those values fit into that 4-step
yes,
first aid that I give you, is that when you come back to the present moment, what rules are going to guide you as to what you do here and now? It's your values.
Yes.
What's important to me? What kind of teacher do I want to be to this child right
Yes.
now? What does this child need from me, and what is it important that I give this child according to my rules for how I want to be a teacher?
Absolutely.
Great. Panelists, I hope you can take a few questions. We would just want to open the platform to our audience. Maybe they want to ask a question or share a remark. Audience, if you could just raise your hand, we would permit you to ask your question or share a remark, or you can post it in the chat and we will try to direct it to the particular psychologist that you would want to respond. All right.
Okay. I'm not seeing any hands being raised so far. But just connecting to what you said, Reverend, around setting a different benchmark. I know prior to last year, I used to have this long list of things that I think I needed to accomplish. And now I tell Annie, because she and I communicate often, I said, I just have 3. And if I can get through 3 major things, that's it. I have some personal calls that I need to make, and those are so delayed. I said, let me work on the things that's paying the bill. If I can get to 3 of those, and then I do the other stuff when I have more time. Yeah. And that's how I've learned to cope a little bit better in this pandemic, right?
For me, Dr. Hardware, it is about time management, you know? So I get up pretty early in the morning, maybe 4:30, 5 o'clock. By 6 o'clock, I'm out walking, exercising, and to start my day. So I don't do it every day, but at least for the week, 3-4 times for the week, I try to exercise. And that gives me the opportunity to smell the fresh air, to listen to the birds chirping, just that personal space, that the air in the morning feels different from in the afternoon.
It does.
And so that starts my day. And while I'm walking I'm also organizing in terms of the priorities that I have for the day. and to, you know, number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4, and then I'm able to start my day off like that. And I remember from our last podcast, somebody said take a long shower too. So I just go in the shower and turn it on and just stand there and allow the water to beat on me. And I find that helps a lot.
Okay.
Dr. Walker, what about you?
What about me? Well, I mean, I talk to both of you quite often, and I tell you guys all the time, if I don't exercise, it's just a part of me. I just don't feel like I'm myself. So exercise is just a part of my daily routine. I try to do it twice. I can't do most of the time. You know, we do 30 minutes in the morning, but in the evening I try to. Also, I try most times to have my dinner very early, and then I exercise thereafter, and then take a nice shower, and I wake up very early in the morning when everybody's perhaps sleeping, sometimes 3, 4 o'clock, and I'm there working, and then I take a nap. That's my routine.
Okay. I see someone's hand is up.
Lavana.
1 second, before I do so, I did see someone commented in the chat about the importance of spirituality, as well as Shireen noted that mentally so many are not coping, but the fear of admitting it because of the stigma attached to mental health issues. As a result, we suppress our emotions for reaching out to people. So that's connected to earlier points made. And then someone, their name is not listed, but also mentioned the need for a close relationship with the spiritual being. So Lavana is hand is up. I will provide the space for them to comment, and if there are no more questions, then we'll close off after that.
Before we
Good night.
But before Lavana, quickly, someone said that they're appreciative of the session. The coping skills mentioned for the teachers are quite helpful. I find the focus in schools are the children. She said essentially what we mentioned earlier, that primarily the focus in schools is on children's mental health, when us as teachers also need to know the way how to cope in order to deal with them. And that is quite evident in the literature, where most of the research, even last night when Trevor and I were on the internet, you know, looking at stuff, we recognized that most of the research that was popping up was really
geared towards children.
Mental health, yes. And even policies now, we know that they're essentially about how teachers and principals, you know, enhance or improve students' well-being. So we'll move on to Lavana, and then we're going to be closing out. Thank you so much, everyone.
Hi, everybody. Good night. I know I came in late, but because, you know, I am so happy when persons talk about exercise, because I'm one for exercise. And believe me, it helps 100%. So I'm just encouraging everybody to just join in. Even 15 minutes, even 15 minutes a day, stretches, it will help. And eventually you will, you know, gradually go up the ladder, increase the time that you do the exercises, and then you increase the exercise and add to whatever you're doing. So, and believe me, it helps mentally, because I've results on top of results that it does. But, you know, I'm taking this time out to just continue to encourage you, exercise, breathing exercise also, because I heard somebody like, you know, when you find yourself going into that mode, you just do a little breathing. Yeah, it slows you down. It slows down the heart rate, and it takes away the panic attack. But we're all humans, and we go through this form of negative behavior, because we call it negative behavior in your body and your mind. So encouraging exercise. Swim if you can swim. Go to the river if you can. You know, go to the beach if you can. Put on your nice bathing suit and your bar chunk and just lie down. That helps also. And listen to the waves. That helps also.
Okay, Lavana. Thank you.
And find that spot and just scream. That helps also. Night, everybody. Thank you for the podcast, everybody. I really do. It is so informative, you know, and I try to tell my friends about it all the time. Continue to do your job, guys.
I was going to tell everyone that you're a physical education specialist. You also do training. So I was going to give you a plug. You also personalized. So I'm talking Lavana tonight. She does personal physical education training. She resides in Jamaica, and she's also.
You know, one quick suggestion that I've not heard mentioned, which is so interesting: laughter.
Yeah.
Notice it's one of the things that we have done a lot. That's how we know the session is good enough, because there's a lot of laughter among us.
Yes.
But these are times when it's so hard to laugh. You're by yourself. So find some laughter in your life. Somebody jokes. Turn on YouTube if you can't and watch some stand-up if it comes to that.
Yeah.
And
That's a
laugh
good one.
yourself. Yes. And as a Christian, I like to think about forgiveness more so myself.
Yes.
I failed yesterday and I failed the day before, but I forgave myself 70 times 7. So I have quite a number of hundreds left to go.
New mercies, Rev.
Yes.
New mercies.
Yes. So some people hear us tonight and say, Lord Jesus, I failed. I'm not doing well. Forgive yourself, man. Don't bench yourself off your own team. Stay in the game, right? Stay in the game.
That's a very good point, Reverend. But I'm aware that we've asked you and the panelists for an hour and a half of your time, and you've been so gracious to give us 5 extra minutes. So we're going to close now because I don't see any comments in the chat. So I would like to thank you for your participation on EduTalk 3rd podcast. We'd also like to thank the listeners who joined in. At one point we had 87, now we're at 75. But thank you for joining in and keeping our company. We also look forward to your positive feedback and also interaction on our social media platforms. And we will be having another podcast in the next few weeks, speaking more with principals and strategies that can be implemented in the schools to help with mental health issues. So stay tuned for that. So we'll ask we'll thank the members of the audience for staying on, and we'll ask the panelists to stay back 5 minutes after the members of audience have left. So thank you very much for tuning in, and we hope to see you again. Maybe some of the panelists wants to grace our stage again. Like, we love this so much, we want to come back. We'll see. Okay, so have a good night, and we look forward to talking with you again.
Thank you so much for coming in.
Thank you all.
Thank you. Great session.
Panelists, please remain behind. That would be great, as Dr. Hardaway mentioned.
All right, we still have